Hello, I'm Dr. Tiffany Jana, and if you have been following any of my social media channels, then you know that we have been offering healing sessions to our clients and to new clients who are looking to have conversations with their teams, with their colleagues, and they're looking for a safe place to have healing conversations around diversity, around all of the things that are happening in the world right now, because there's a lot of collective trauma and it's not an easy thing to broach. So we're offering those sessions, and we're also doing fireside chats, which are the kind of replacement for keynotes. I used to go around the world doing keynotes all the time, and now we're doing these fireside chats where we're able to have conversations with DEI professionals and with executive leadership and just talk about the things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion that our clients want to talk about. So today I'm actually going to answer some questions that were left over from the Q&A for one particular client, and I thought that I'd share it with everyone because this is really good information. So the first question is, how does respect of the individual contribute to the team dynamics? In diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're always talking about creating a respectful workplace, a place where individual identities are valued and appreciated. So respect for the individual creates that sense of belonging that helps team dynamics flourish. So if I feel like I am being sort of diminished, like I am not appreciated, like I'm not listened to or valued, then I'm not really going to feel very motivated or inspired to engage on a team. Whereas the opposite is also true, correct? Right? If I am feeling like I'm appreciated, like I'm respected, like I am valued, like the individual aspects of myself that I bring into the team actually matter and get to see the light of day, well, that's going to encourage further participation. So teamwork is allowed to flourish and thrive when individuals are respected and welcomed into the work. And I like to define inclusion as how we invite people into the work, because diversity is just all of the different people, and that's important. That's an important first step. You've got to have diversity, right, in order to really optimize it and in order to create a wonderfully welcoming environment. But if you have diversity and you're not actually welcoming anybody into the work in a meaningful way to show up, then it's really just optics, right? Next question. What are some tips or ideas on how to increase your familiarity in a shelter-in-place environment where we don't necessarily have the face-to-face or casual environment, or when you meet, there's a large audience? How should we foster this shared knowledge while working from home? So I'm actually encouraging all of my clients to hold dedicated spaces for the things that are not work, right? When we have a physical environment, a physical office, a physical workplace, we're easily able to take for granted the organic contact that we made with other people, right? So what happens now in this virtual environment, particularly since we are dealing with collective trauma, we're not just dealing with it's not just people working from home. This is people trying to work at their houses during a global pandemic and now the largest civil rights protests that the world has ever seen worldwide. This is massive, okay? So people just trying to emotionally survive is a lot. So what I'm inviting our clients to do is to create intentional spaces for people to just fellowship, just commune, just be humans, not human doings. And know that 1 minute check-in before the meeting, it doesn't really count, because if I know I've got 30 seconds, 30 to 60 seconds to tell you something about how I'm actually doing, or maybe something personal, and then we're going to launch straight into the business of the day, that's not enough room. Like, our feelings and our hearts need to expand. They need some breathing space. So of course, no one should be forced to participate in these gatherings, but there should be at the very least weekly gatherings, and they should probably happen at some kind of team level, right? Team or department. Small is fine. When they get too big, it can be a little bit unwieldy in a Zoom or on an online channel, unless you can do a lot of breakout rooms. But you can call them water coolers. You can do happy hours. I've seen people do some game nights. I've seen people do like media nights where they'll watch movies together. And there's so many different ways to convene online without having it be all about the work. So be intentional about creating space for people to just connect with each other. And if you're a team lead, that becomes even more important. Like, create space for people to just connect because they're human and alive and also suffering in this moment. So the third question is, it seems to me that the basic concept of respect of another human being is under attack today in many ways. Do you think that the current sociocultural polarity and acrimony is increasing or decreasing our willingness to accept diversity as inclusion, or is it driving more exclusion and avoidance, thus less respect? Slightly complicated question, but what I see here is yes. So we do have we have an increased expectation that people are going to respect each other. That should not be a problem. Okay. The fact that we've been able to persist for so long without basic human respect being the norm is what the problem is. And I think what people are struggling with is, particularly if we look right now at this Black Lives Matter moment, is a perfect, example of all of this stuff coming to a crescendo. So what we've got is people who are demanding to be seen and people who want to be respected, who want to be heard. And in order for people to understand the plight of what is happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, you can pick anything, pick any marginalized experience. In order for you to understand what it is like to be disabled, to live with a disability, in order for you to understand what it is like to have immigrant status in this country and try to, make a living and make it through this very judgmental society, you have to really have close proximate relationships with people who you care about. Because when we don't have those relationships, it's very easy to paint things with a broad brush, and it's very easy to, judge, to dismiss, and to minimalize people and their value. And that's not appropriate. So I think that the reason that people are so defensive about not wanting to increase their cultural fluency, not wanting to demonstrate respect through understanding, through empathy and compassion, is because it represents a whole boatload of work that has to be done. I'm seeing on social media, I'm seeing so many posts and requests from white people who want to understand like the thrust of what is happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. And they're being told from many, many sources, including myself, you've got to educate yourself. You have to educate yourself. And it is not the job of the people around you or the underrepresented population to educate you for you, right? No one has to serve you in that way. Now, in my case, I happen to be an educator in this space, so you're welcome to follow all of my channels and access the books and the resources that I've made available, as have countless other authors and thought leaders and activists. But your African-American colleague, for example, should not be your target educator. Now, if they want to help you out, that's fine. And, frankly, these people who've been working in diversity, equity, and inclusion and are working in these spaces now should probably be compensated extra for the massive emotional toll that it's going to take to manage any of that work in this kind of climate. So really, really challenging stuff. But I think that the resistance comes from the resistance to change and the awareness of how steep the learning curve is, right? You don't know what you don't know, but people do recognize that if I sit on one side of this issue and I really don't understand and I kind of want to, and you're telling me that you're way over here on the other end of that polarity, well, how am I going to bridge that gap? And that gap represents effort, right? This is not going to be an easy journey, nor is it easy to occupy marginalized identities, undervalued and underrepresented identities. All of these things are hard, and we're just getting to a point where there is so much expectation of contact between us and across these demographics that we can't just haphazardly bump against people and hurt them because we're too lazy to prioritize or too unwilling to get to understand where they're coming from. Like, it's unkind. So yeah, we've got to do work, and that's creating the tension. People just don't want to do the work. And in some respects, it's because they just honestly don't care. And why do they not care? Well, because they've bought into this fallacy that somehow we're different, that somehow we're not one human family, that somehow race is not a social construct and is some biological thing that inherently makes people vastly different. And it's not. It's really not. It's a lie. That's some research that you have to do. Race was invented during the Spanish Inquisition, and it's incredible how much we have put so much value into this construct, and we allow ourselves to separate ourselves because of it. But that's a larger piece of work. All right, next question. You talked about embracing your feminine self and at the same time the masculinity of forging ahead in the world. What do you think the gender trait of this would be going forward. So, I mean, honestly, I think that the gender trait moving forward is the integration. I think that there's a reason that we're seeing an increase in people who are identifying as gender fluid, identifying as non-binary, using they, them, and other pronouns. Because there's probably less of a problem with masculinity and femininity themselves as there is with the very limited assignments that we make for what we ascribe to femininity and masculinity, the expectations of what that means in our society, and how incredibly limiting and problematic and confining those expectations are. So for me, both personally and I think energetically, there is an integration of the masculine and the feminine. And quite frankly, how did we land ourselves in this particular state of affairs that we see in our world? Our systems and structures, are at large, are very masculine dominated, and you can see that as represented in the disproportionate amount of male leadership we have in institutions, organizations, governments around the world. Okay, and so increasingly we're starting to see the rise. I call it the rise of the divine feminine. We're starting to see more and more feminine energy that is coming out front and leading. What happened in New Zealand with New Zealand's leader, a woman, the first country to declare 0 cases of COVID. They handled their leadership incredibly well in that place. And it was a very inclusive, very thorough, very feminine response. So I think that leadership, culture, and certainly for me personally moving forward is just an integration of the masculine and the feminine. And it really brings in the best of all of those qualities without those excruciating limitations. Dr. Jana, earlier in the conversation, you talked about your 5 identities. What are those? Well, that's very personal, but I certainly have been known to share personal information. So English was not my first language. I was born in El Paso, Texas, on the border of Mexico, and I was just surrounded by friends and babysitters and people all around me who were Spanish-speaking people. So I literally just picked up Spanish first. People who could take care of me. My parents were working parents, physicians, and I just picked up Spanish first. So English as a second language is one of them. Another one is I have multiple invisible disabilities, right? So depression, anxiety, some autoimmune things. So that is one. And then I'm a person of color. I identify as Black, African American. I am gender minority, identify as gender non-binary, gender fluid. And that is they, them pronouns. I'm not offended by she, her pronouns, but they, them are certainly my preferred. And then as you know, the interesting thing about sexual orientation is that it's predicated on a knowledge of the gender of the person who is attracted to the other person. Well, my gender identity is non-binary. My sexual orientation is much broader than that. So I identify as pansexual. Gender doesn't factor into who I'm attracted to. I'm attracted to the essence of a person. I'm attracted to the spirit of the person. Their outside spaceship makes no difference to me. So therefore I am on the LGBTQIA spectrum, and those are the 5 intersectional identities that I identify with. So, what are your thoughts on emotional tax in the workforce? This is the final question. And I did touch on that before. And essentially, certainly for, again, at this moment, for Black people in the workplace at this time, just being Black, especially in America, Black in America, is exhausting because of the delusion of white supremacy, because our systems and structures were created in order to uphold a fallacy that some people are more valuable than others, that some people are more intelligent than others, that some people are more beautiful than others, that some people deserve more than others. It's all a lie. It's all lies. And we've invested so much in it. And literally, most of the systems and structures around us are created to reinforce that idea. So, if you don't know about the history of redlining and gerrymandering, and all of the different ways, our mass incarceration system, the origins of our modern policing system, so much of what we know, even our entire financial system and our economy was built on the labor from free labor, forced labor from enslaved Africans. So when you understand the history of what it means to be Black and the legacy of how the lies that we were taught in school, that we were educated, we were miseducated to reinforce this false belief that any of us is inherently any better than the other. And we were educated that way equally. So even if you are Black, you got that same education. And part of the emotional tax is having to unwind all of the lies that we were told that somehow we were less than, when we never were, and we certainly are not now. And so as white people in particular wake up to the realities of the atrocities, what happened to George Floyd, what happened to Breonna, what happened to all of the men and the women and the children who have been harmed and or murdered by the US police system. This is not news. This is not a phenomenon that just started in the past few months. We've been being killed since 1619, since the first enslaved Africans were brought to these shores. So the emotional tax of having the majority population all around you waking up to the reality that the matrix is rigged, okay? And that somehow you may have played a part in it, whether unwittingly or not, benefited from it, whether realizing it or not, privileged from it, through no fault of your own. It's difficult because a lot of people are looking for support, for answers, and there's an emotional tax associated with being asked by your white counterparts, peers, leaders, for your opinion, for your support, and just carrying that weight around on a regular basis is a lot. It's a really big deal. So be thoughtful as you move forward. And be thoughtful, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about everyone. It is not an inclusive diversity conversation if white people are not at the table. That's called an affinity conversation, right? If you're separating all the groups out. And so it is important, particularly at this time, to recognize that we are all now carrying an emotional burden, because we are being collectively traumatized, first by the pandemic and now by the largest civil rights movement the world has ever seen. Don't lose sight of how important that is. We are living in a history book right now. And what I would say to particularly leaders of people, whether you supervise one person or you are the CEO of a multinational corporation, how you treat people right now, certainly within your company, but also your stakeholders, your customers, your constituents, how you treat people during this will mark and define your legacy for the rest of your life. Your career will be impacted by these decisions. So whether you've been a diversity champion all along, or you're just waking up to a fuller understanding of why it's so important to value this work and to embed systems and structures that create room for everyone to be successful, you have an opportunity now to get it right. You have an opportunity now to course correct, to build a strong strategy, to secure you and your organization's legacy, and to help be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. I wish you all so much luck, and I'll see you